Hello, this is Sandiva Gross from the Bureau for Workers' Activities at the ILO. I'm glad to welcome the ILO's Director-General Guy Ryder in this course to discuss some of the key questions around collective bargaining and minimum wages. Mr. Ryder, collective bargaining is at the heart of the ILO's decent work agenda as a fundamental enabling right for workers to improve their wages and working conditions. However, in many countries, collective bargaining coverage has been declining and fewer workers are enjoying the benefits of collective agreements. What can be done to reverse this trend, and how can the ILO support this?
Well, indeed, you're right to point to the constitutional responsibilities of the ILO in this area. If you go all the way back to our founding documents, effective realisation of the right to collective bargaining and the promotion of collective bargaining figure in our constitution. They figure in Convention 98, which is a fundamental rights convention of the ILO. So you've got this obligation to promote and to facilitate, and yet, and this is a little bit the challenge that we face, it's accepted that collective bargaining is generally a voluntary action. So we've got to work out how to encourage, to promote people to engage in collective bargaining. And you're quite right to point to the very worrying trend of a diminution of bargaining coverage in most of our countries. I won't say all of them, but in most of our countries. And that has consequences. Of course, it has consequences for working people. You know, you join a trade union so that union can bargain for you and get better working conditions. If that's not happening, unions have an existential problem. But there's a wider problem that goes beyond trade unions, and that is in countries where collective bargaining is weak, inequalities grow, fairness at work declines, and all of the social consequences of those situations, I think, are being felt more and more strongly in the world. So that's my first point. Promoting collective bargaining, of course, is in the interest of working people, it's in the interest of their trade unions, but I believe it's a wider social interest. And I think that is the point from which we must depart, and the way we must try to engage both governments and indeed employers in this task of promoting collective bargaining. Now, I also think that we're faced with a real challenge because the alternative view is out there. That is to say, there are a number of people who believe that collective bargaining is an obstruction, a hindrance to effective company performance, that your company will be better off if you can get rid of it. And I think we have to really make the argument against that. It's got a very visceral appeal to people. But history shows that actually companies are more effective, more productive when they engage with their workforces, when they work with them rather than against them. And countries which have very strong collective bargaining systems and traditions are actually amongst the most productive in the world. So how do we go about this job? We have to convince people, we have to win the arguments in favour of the economic and social case for collective bargaining. We have to strongly defend the principles of fairness and equity, and we have to make these arguments in favour of social coherence. Now, where collective bargaining is weak or does not exist, I mean, there are different ways of deciding on working conditions and in particular on pay. And minimum wages, of course, is one of those. Historically, I think the balance is that where collective bargaining has been strong in those countries, interest in minimum wages tends to be correspondingly less. You don't need legislation on minimum wages. And vice versa. Where collective bargaining is weak or absent, minimum wages take on a greater importance. And that's a message of our times, because as collective bargaining in many countries is being weakened, interest in minimum wages is increasing. And we're seeing that. And so the ILO has also, I think, a key role, not a contradictory, but a complementary role in promoting minimum wage fixing machinery as an accompaniment to collective bargaining. And some of the biggest challenges we faced, I think, I think immediately of Southeast Asia and the garment industry, where minimum wage issues have been very, very present in Bangladesh and Cambodia. But let's not forget, minimum wages have come in recently in Germany. They've come in my country in the late 1990s, something which we never wanted in the past but now need. So I think we've got to have this integrated but global approach to minimum wages, collective bargaining. It's about fairness at work. It's about reducing inequality. It's about social cohesion and, in the end, the stability of our societies. So these are not marginal issues. They're not technical issues. They're not an issue just for working people. They're an issue for our societies and need to be treated with the due importance that they really have.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder.
Thank you.